is on. Hi, thank you. Welcome to the West Basin Municipal Water District Water Policy and Legislation Committee. Call this committee meeting to order. EJ, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, happy to do so, Madam Chair. Director Don Deere.
Here.
Director and Chair Gloria Gray.
Here.
Director Scott Houston.
This is Director Houston. I was able to call in, but I can't seem to log on, but I'm here.
Director Alvarez. And Director Williams.
I'm here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I'm also calling in EJ, so could you please tell me the next item on the agenda, please?
Yes, so we've determined a quorum and now we are at public comment. And Madam Chair, we have received several requests for public comment. I'll read through the list and that'll be our cue to introduce you. We do have a timer here that's 3 minutes long for each member of the public. If you don't hear your name announced, please raise your hand and we'll add you to the queue for public comment. So we do have Dr. Margot Griswold, also Jeanette Vosberg, Ms. Patricia McPherson, and we have also received a request by the Surfrider South Bay for public comment. So with that, is Dr. Margot Griswold with us? Dr. Griswold? Okay, we'll go to Ms. Jeanette Vosberg.
Hi, this is Jeanette. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'd like to defer to Patricia McPherson and then follow her or Dr. Margot Griswold.
Okay, Ms. Patricia McPherson, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, I had sent in a letter, a public comment letter. This also applies to, I believe, your strategic plan goal 5 for item 6B. And I'm wondering if that letter was distributed to staff and board members. But what I'm trying to bring your attention to is the August 3rd Grassroots Coalition letter to you in 2021 asking for your support to send a letter to the Fish and Game Commission. I'm not sure if you understand their role with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. It is the Fish and Game Commission that actually creates the regulations and codes to which the department abides by. And our request to you was to support the Fish and Game Commission in their Title 14, Section 630 approval of Bionna as a terrestrial non-marine ecological reserve that was specifically intended to protect its freshwater resources and its salt marsh and the species dependent upon those habitat, which included specifically the Belding Savannah sparrow and its pickleweed and the wildlife corridors there. I recently, in this letter, sent you new information from the SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. They put in a final groundwater sustainable plan for the Santa Monica subbasin. And the Appendix X of that, or F of that, the modelers cited that they have no data, no modeling data for the marina, which includes the Bionna wetlands area, to determine saltwater intrusion. And I highlighted for you that at a Fish and Game Commission meeting, the director from CDFW had assured them that the West Basin board members had made the determination that there would be no saltwater intrusion harm to the Silverado Aquifer or other overlying aquifers from the CDFW plan to remove over 3.5 million cubic yards of soil from the area and making it go below sea level. So I don't believe that you've made any commitment of that sort, and it would be helpful for you to support the Fish and Game Commission's designation of Biona, and to also clear up that matter with the Fish and Game Commission as well. We also would ask that, as the modelers have requested, there is money from the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in the state to put in monitoring wells in that area to help with that determination. And as part of our ask, we have asked you to help us garner a groundwater dependent ecosystem study for the area, which hasn't been done. Thank you. And Dr. Griswold is here. She's trying to get on. I know that she's there in the background.
Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson. Dr. Margot Griswold, are you with us now?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You have 3 minutes.
Right. Committee members, thank you for allowing me to speak, and I'm speaking in support of Grassroots Coalition's request and the letter sent previously in 2021. And I would say it's very important, this data gap that's been identified by the Groundwater Sustainability Plan modelers. And it really questions how the final EIR could just ignore our comments on this same situation. The data is not there to make their determination. And so I believe that the last thing we knew that the committee and the board for West Basin was going to monitor the situation of the Biona planning. And I think this is a pretty big red flag that more investigation needs to be done. And in support of Patricia's request, if you, the Conservation Committee, would help us in our request to get money from the State Water Resources Board that's exactly available for this type of monitoring work and monitoring wells. And it's necessary immediately. And so we need to talk to the planners at the city of Santa Monica who seem to be running the groundwater sustainability plan. So we're asking for that. And also I would like to update you on our groundwater pumping data that we've gathered. The Regional Water Quality Control Board is forthcoming with their one NIPDES permit, and it shows just for the past 10 years, on average, annually, around 140 acre feet of water just from one side is being pumped and put to the Biona flood control channel or the sanitary sewer in those years. That's a lot of water being taken away from the ability to migrate towards the Biona wetlands, a groundwater dependent ecosystem. So we continue to gather information that's very important to why we are asking for a consensus meeting to really plan the Biona wetlands restoration. We would love to have your support and backing for such a consensus planning group. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Griswold. The next speaker that we have, Jeanette Vosberg. Ms. Vosberg, you might be on mute. I apologize, Ms. Vosberg. Oh, there you go. We can hear you now.
Okay. I just wanted to point out that Margot, Patricia, and I have been around working on the wetlands each for about 30 years. That's 90 years of experience. And much of what we have found has been through dogged determination and Public Information Request Act, finding things out. And what we found is that one thing that's missing is monitoring wells that can tell us what is actually happening in the Bionna Wetlands Ecological Reserve. Another thing that we found is that that classification of ecological reserve is huge. And it's not something that would in any way support digging out Bionna 20 or 30 feet deep and inviting in saltwater. It's just not, there's nothing there. Everything says that we are a freshwater, predominantly freshwater wetland, seasonal wetland, and that we should remain that way. So I'd like to just ask for monitoring wells, and I'd like to focus on the groundwater dependent ecosystem of which Bionna is a part. We're desperate for water. We have a monitor of the rainwater, and we've gotten 5 inches for this rainy period, only 5 inches on an average of 15 inches per year. And I would beg of you to please consider everything that Patricia has sent you in her letter and consider supporting us in getting monitor wells installed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vosberg. I have 2 remaining requests for public comment. The first one would be Surfrider South Bay, and the second one would be Ms. Kathy Knight. Is there a representative of Surfrider South Bay?
Yes, this is Craig Cadwallader. I'll defer to after Ms. Knight, and then I'm talking on a separate subject. Thank you, if that's possible.
Ms. Knight, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
You have 3 minutes.
Okay. My name is Kathy Knight. I'm on the board of the Bionna Ecosystem Education Project. We've been working on this issue to protect Bionna for 30 years. And we are asking that you do support the request of Grassroots Coalition in their letter today to place more monitoring wells in the Bionna and Marina Del Rey area to monitor for saltwater intrusion. And because we are concerned that this freshwater aquifers that are there are very important. We're in one of the worst droughts, they say, in the news in the last 1,200 years. We need to protect every bit of freshwater that we have for ourselves and for the wetlands. And I would like to see a study also, a full groundwater dependent ecosystem study for the Bionna Wetlands Ecological Reserve. I think we really need that to know where to go in the future. And finally, I've been working with the indigenous people here from this area for a long time. I work with John Tommy Roses and of the Tongva indigenous people, and they've been living here for 10,000 years, and it's a registered sacred site. The Bionna Ecosystem Education Area is a registered sacred site in California, and we need to really need to look at this proposed restoration in a very respectful way for these people. And that's the summary of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Knight. Mr. Craig Cadwallader.
Good afternoon. My name is Craig Cadwallader, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Surfrider Foundation South Bay chapter. And good afternoon, Chair Grace, committee members and staff. I would like to request that West Basin consider sending letters of support for AB 1953 and AB 2638, both of which address hydration stations or water refill station. AB 1953 by Manchin is for public facilities requiring accessible water hydration stations by the year January 1 of 2025. AB 2638 by Bloom requires schools to have hydration stations and to allow students and staff to use reusable water bottles. And both of those are potential state mandated local programs that could include funding from the state. And I think it's a perfect match for West Basin's very commendable hydration station program. And I hope it would allow West Basin to expand that even further, potentially without additional expense. But I would sincerely appreciate if the board could consider sending letters of support for both those measures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Craig. Is there any other member of the public that would like to speak now during public comment? If so, please raise your hand using the electronic feature. Seeing and hearing none, Madam Chair, we are ready to move forward on the agenda. If everybody not speaking or not a member of the board or staff presenting, if you could also mute yourself, because we've been notified that we're hearing a little bit of background noise as well. So with that, Madam Chair, we're ready to move forward on the agenda.
All right, thank you. And thank you to the public for your comments this morning or this afternoon. DJ, would you make sure the board received the letter that Ms. McPherson, I believe, referred to, and whatever response we can give to them? So if you could follow up on that, please.
Yes. So the next item on the agenda is presentations, and staff has no presentations. That brings us to item 5, our action calendar, Madam Chair. And we do have one item under our action calendar. It is item 5A. It is a support position on Assembly Bill 2142 by Assemblymember Gabriel. This is related to income taxes and the exclusion for turf replacement water conservation programs. And for this presentation, we have Matthew Bay, our Water Policy Analyst 3.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, EJ. Chairwoman Gray and members of the committee and board, as the general manager mentioned, staff is bringing Assembly Bill 2142 to this committee today with a recommendation to adopt a support position on the bill. The bill was introduced last month by Assemblyman Jesse Gabriel, who's a representative from the San Fernando Valley area. In summary, this bill would, for a 5-year period, exclude from state gross income any amount received as a rebate, voucher, or any other financial incentive that's issued by a local water agency for participation in a turf replacement conservation program, several of which West Basin offers currently. So during the last drought, legislation was passed to provide similar income exclusions on the state side. These exclusions expired at the end of the 2018 calendar year. And since then, 2 legislative proposals have been made to extend the sunset date of the income exclusion, but neither of those legislative proposals succeeded, based in part, maybe largely in part, on the state not being in an official drought at that time. However, since we're now in year 3 of a serious drought, and with the state looking to water agencies and asking water users throughout the state to reduce their water demand, this bill provides an opportunity to remove one of the financial disincentives to turf removal programs that we think will encourage additional participation in not only West Basin's various grass removal programs, but programs that all of our partnering water agencies offer. And while the average residential grass removal rebate amount is less than $5,000, currently we have increased rebate amounts, especially here in the West Basin service area. And so some of our residents are actually eligible to receive up to $25,000 in grass removal rebates, which presents a much higher tax liability, potential tax liability. And so the tax ramifications we think have even greater impacts on some of our lower income areas, which we think makes this legislation all the more important to support in order to reduce one of those barriers to seeing the proliferation of drought tolerant landscapes in our many diverse communities. Now, I want to note that this legislation only affects income taxes on the state side of things. There's currently no federal tax exclusion for turf removal conservation programs. There is draft language in the Build Back Better legislative proposal to exempt similar rebate incentives from federal income tax, but that legislation is currently on hold. And so this is really our one opportunity in the immediate term to do something like this. AB 2142 is being co-sponsored by the Association of California Water Agencies, CalWEP, and the Water Now Alliance. And it's currently referred to the Assembly Revenue and Taxation Committee with a hearing date set for March 21st. There have been some efforts recently to expand the tax exemption status to additional conservation rebate items, such as outdoor irrigation devices. But from what we hear, those efforts appear to have stalled for the time being. Probably won't happen this year with this piece of legislation. So again, we think it's more important than ever with the current drought to increase participation in consumer rebate programs that save water year round. Again, AB 2142, we feel would reinstate an important exemption for turf replacement rebates from gross income in California and would align it with other certain permanently exempt water efficiency rebates like water efficient toilets and clothes washers. And so for these reasons, staff is asking this committee to recommend a support position to the full board at its board meeting later this month. And this would allow West Basin to coordinate its activities, its advocacy efforts with our state lobbyist who's on the call today, and as well as with our other water industry partners to seek out the passage of this bill. So that concludes my report. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Matthew. Are there any questions? Board members, please speak up. Director Houston?
No question. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you agree to move this legislation forward with a recommendation for approval?
This is Don Deere. I move we approve it.
Oh, is
pass it
Don
on.
the alternate on the? Okay, all right.
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Don.
You're welcome.
All right, EJ, next item, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. That completes our action calendar for today, brings up our information calendar. And the first item that we have here is an update. It's item 6A on West Basin's redistricting activities and the ad hoc committee meetings. And for this presentation, we do have one of our consultants, Mr. Chris Scannell from Nielsen Merksimer, for a brief presentation. Just as an overview, you might recall that earlier this year, the West Basin Board of Directors and the board president, of course, Don Deere, did set up a census redistricting ad hoc committee consisting of President Deere as well as Director Gloria Gray. The redistricting ad hoc has met with West Basin's staff as well as our consultants on several occasions to actually identify some of the potential issues in relation to our previously drawn division lines and look at potential solutions as far as balancing out the population within all 5 divisions, as well as some shifts as far as population goes between those divisions since the last census redistricting. And so for this presentation, as I mentioned, we do have Chris Scannell. He will be presenting an overview of the previous maps as well as the potential future maps for the committee and board's consideration. So Chris, I'll hand it off to you.
Sounds good, thank you. I'm going to bring up PowerPoint here. All right, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Great. So thanks for having me here this afternoon. I'm going to start off, talk a little bit about the process and the timeline for how we go about doing this. Talk about, as EJ said, the current director divisions and the demographics, and then talk about a proposal that was put together by the subcommittee for adjusting the current division lines. And so in terms of the process and the timeline, the state law basically requires that there be 2 formal public hearings before the adoption of the final map. And we have until April 17th to do that. So, obviously we've been working on this now for a couple, 6 or 7 weeks. And we're looking at wrapping it up here in the next month or so.
Chris,
yes.
I apologize for interrupting you. Is it possible to enlarge the slide on the screen?
That's a good question.
Sorry to put you on the spot. I don't know if you can or not. We also included the presentation in the comment section. There's a link to the presentation there as well. There you go. That's perfect.
Right. All right. Look at that. Technological success. All right. So as I was saying, we're looking at wrapping this up in April 2022. April 17th is our deadline, with the idea that the new divisions will start to roll in November of this year. So anybody who is currently up for election this November will serve the remainder of their current term. Nobody's term gets affected, or cut short. But then you'll run for re-election in the new divisions. And those directors who have terms ending in 2024 continue to serve their current terms. And then when that term expires, they'll run for re-election in the new divisions, divisions 1 and 3.
I noticed you at the next to the bottom, you say no council member's term cut short. You do mean no director's term
cut short, correct. Yeah, everybody who has been elected to the board continues to serve out their current term.
Mm-hmm.
So now what I want to do is shift and talk very briefly about sort of the rules of the road, how we go about considering whether a map is legal, making adjustments, what factors get taken into consideration. And the way this process works is that federal law sets sort of the big outer boundaries, a few key things that we have to comply with. And then state law really fills in the gaps. And the major federal criteria are equal population. Going back to the 1960s, the Supreme Court has said that any jurisdiction that uses electoral districts has to have they have to check every 10 years to see that those electoral districts or divisions are roughly equal in population. They don't have to be perfectly equal, but they have to be approximately equal. And what that means over the years, the courts have said, if the difference between the largest and the smallest division is within 10% of the ideal, then that's going to be presumed to be valid. If it's over that, then it's presumed to be invalid. And then the other 2 major federal components are protection of minority voting rights, primarily the Voting Rights Act, and related to that, avoiding racial gerrymandering. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then in terms of the state law fill-ins, the Elections Code contains a handful of considerations that it says may be considered. Topography and geography, which is kind of a natural and man-made barriers that make sense in terms of understanding what divisions are. So major roads, mountain ranges, railroad tracks, anything that a person can look at and understand as a boundary of a division. It also identifies cohesiveness, contiguity, integrity, and compactness of territory, which is sort of a wordy way of saying you want districts that make sense. You don't want them sort of meandering all over the place and in and out and in a way that people are not going to understand where they're voting and who they're voting with, and be able to organize politically around a sort of common community. And related to that, then consideration of communities of interest of the divisions. And that can be, any number of different things. It's really sort of any sort of social or economic or political consideration that makes sense to keep in a single district for purposes of representation. And it can be very broad. One of my favorite examples is we did the city of Phoenix 10 years ago. And they had some folks come into the city council and say, look, we have these historic brick homes downtown. It matters to us how you deal with them in the planning process. We think we have a community of interest that should be taken into consideration. And the council kept them all in a single division. Obviously, in the case of the West Basin Municipal Water District, it's probably not going to be brick homes, but that gives you sort of a sense of the breadth of what a community of interest can be and how broad it can be. And it's really sort of unique to each district and what interests should be taken into consideration for representation for purposes of this district. And then beyond the statutory criteria, there are a handful of traditional considerations that the courts have recognized as being legitimate, which could include trying to minimize the amount of shifting from one election cycle to the other. So particularly to avoid moving someone so that they end up skipping an election. And that really relates to the other two, which is preserving the core of existing districts and minimizing changes within reason, to the extent that you can, but still pursuing other legitimate goals within the law. And so with that by way of background, the first thing we do when we do this process is we look at the demographics of the current existing divisions. And our first focus, of course, is the equal population consideration. You'll see here that the current divisions have the populations of each is listed here on the screen. You see that divisions 1 and 2 are about 4%, 4.5% underpopulated, and division 5 is almost 6% overpopulated. What that means, I mentioned the 10% threshold that the Supreme Court has identified as the cutoff for a valid plan. Your current divisions are slightly over that, which means that there do need to be some changes to the divisions. A couple other things just to flag for the current divisions related to the Voting Rights Act. Currently, Division 2 has a slight majority of its citizen voting age population, so eligible voters, that is non-Hispanic African American. And that's really sort of the threshold that we look at in terms of the Voting Rights Act. And while it is a slight majority, the courts have recognized that sometimes it needs to be a little bit stronger majority to be an effective district for that voting. I also note that currently there are no divisions that are majority Latino, but we'll talk in the subcommittee proposal that while it won't have a majority Latino district, will go up considerably in Division 5. And so, I guess I had it on the wrong side. You didn't get to see that, but these are the demographics that I was summarizing. You see the 10+% and the slight majority in Division 2. And so we've met a couple times, as EJ said, with the subcommittee to talk through options for changes, because we do know that we do need to make some. One option would be minor tinkering just to bring us back right under 10%. But the subcommittee decided in terms of pursuing a proposal that it really wanted to focus on those Voting Rights Act considerations that I mentioned to try and bolster those districts slightly to make them address Voting Rights Act concerns. And so there are some changes proposed in the subcommittee's proposal. And they really relate to divisions 2, 4, and 5. Divisions 1 and 3 in this proposal remain unchanged from the current configurations. And so what the proposal does is it unifies Lennox into Division 5, the unincorporated community of Lennox into Division 5, which then requires Division 2 to pick up some additional population to balance things back out. And it does that by picking up a little additional territory in Hawthorne. It already has some. A little bit of territory in North Gardena and unifies West Athens. But then it moves north and it unifies Ladera Heights as well and View Park, Windsor. So those communities move into Division 2. That leaves Division 4 underpopulated, and so it moves a bit to the east to pick up some additional territory in Western Hawthorne to balance the population back out. And then those, obviously those changes are all along the borders of Division 5. And so Division 5, as I said, picks up and unifies all of Lennox, but loses some of that territory primarily in Hawthorne to Divisions 4 and Division 2. I have here, this is an overlay of the cities and the census designated places, if you're interested in looking at it, you know, that and how the various divisions relate to those boundary lines. So you can see the purple lines are the cities. You know, this here is Lenox. Obviously, it's unified into Division 5. The colors are the divisions. Inglewood is kept whole, Westmont, West Athens, etc. And these, I should mention, these lines are also available on a Google Map viewer. So if anybody is interested and has questions, we can zoom into that and look at specific streets or areas within the divisions of the proposal. In terms of the demographics, the impact of this proposal is to drop that total population deviation from over 10% down to under 7. So we're well within the threshold that we need to be within to comply with the equal population requirements. The other two things to note is that it moves Division 2, the African-American population that was a bare majority before, goes from about 51% up to about 58. So it really strengthens that as an opportunities district for African-American voters there. And also then Division 5, as a result of that, the Latino citizen voting age population goes from about 41% up to about 48. So not quite a majority, but still a much stronger Latino opportunity district there as well. And so with that, I'm happy to answer questions. As I said, we can look at the online map viewer if you want to dig into specific boundaries and boundary changes. I'll turn it back to the subcommittee.
All right, thank you. Director Deere, do you have any questions or comments?
No, not at this time. I agree with the
Right.
recommendation of the committee, of course.
Thank you. Director Houston?
I do have a quick question. If Christopher, if you can go back that last slide, the one that showed the new makeup of the, and
This one
really
here?
this is just, yeah, that one. What does NH mean? NH, black, white, Asian? What does that mean?
Non-Hispanic.
Non-Hispanic, okay.
Yeah. The way the census asks the question, you can, they give you the racial categories, and on top of that, you can choose Latino or non-Latino. And so they sort of separate it back out this way so that it adds up to 100%.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And then can you go back to the proposed new map? And I just want to, oh no, go, there you go. That's the one, right?
Uh-huh.
This is what the subcommittee is recommending, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and I know we've got an email of this as well, but so basically in a nutshell, I think Division 4, some of the unincorporated next to Culver City would move over to Director Gray's area in her division, but down next to El Segundo, you're adding more to Division 4, I believe, right?
Correct. Because it's lost Ladera Heights, part of Ladera Heights, and View Park Windsor, it then has to move down here to make up that population loss. And so it already has Del Air down here. It's grabbing some additional territory in Hawthorne.
Okay, very good. But as far as on the Culver City, we're right on the city limit, even including Blair Hills, that neighborhood on the edge there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it follows the city boundary exactly.
Okay, perfect, good. Okay, now I do understand this, and I'm okay with this as far as, I'm not sure what next steps are, but I know that it had to be presented at this committee. So, so thank you to the subcommittee for reviewing this with our consultants. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is Director Williams on the line or on the call?
Yes, I am, Madam Chair.
Yes, comments or?
No, none for me at this time. Thank you very much.
Okay, what about Director Alvarez? Okay, all right. Well, thank you for the presentation. And Director Deere, you're okay with moving it forward with the recommendation?
Yes.
Okay, we move the item forward with the recommendation for the board to consider approval. All right, EJ, are there any other items?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have 2 additional items, but I did want to clarify one thing. So now that we have the feedback from the committee and board, we'll be working with our legal counsel to bring this back before the entire board for action. We'll need to do that, I believe, twice in order to allow for public comment and public participation on this issue. But we'll work with both Chris as well as our legal counsel, Steve O'Neill, as far as bringing that back to the board for their consideration.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. That was for information. And Chris, thank you for the presentation. So it was just information and feedback. So thank you, EJ. I just want to make note that the call I may have to get off the call. So Director Deere, if that happens, would you please go over?
Sure.
Thank you very much. All right, EJ, please continue.
All right. So the next item that we have for you today is item 6B. It is our legislative update for the month of February 2022. And as always, we have staff available for our state and federal affairs updates, but we regularly try to bring in our state and federal consultants as well for a specific update on what's going on in Sacramento, Washington, D.C. And today we do have representatives from Neobel, Pappas and Associates to present on our state legislative update. And for this presentation, we have Emily Pappas for the presentation. So Emily, if you could turn on your camera, and I think you have the presentation as well.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, thanks for having us on here. It's nice to see everyone and hear voices. So it's been a busy year right out the gate. We just passed our bill introduction deadline on February 18th. And so I think of note just for the total amount of bills introduced, 2,020 bills introduced, the majority of them in the assembly, but obviously they have more members, so that makes sense at the end of the day. And legislative bill hearings have started. The majority of them will start in the next few weeks in policy committees, but they have already started and kept us busy with letters due and positions being taken. And then our firm is currently tracking 16 measures for you all for the district, and we're working closely with Matthew and EJ on prioritizing. So next up, just generally, I know you always like to have an update with what's going on with COVID in the Capitol. I would say after dealing with this for 2 years, the legislature is mostly heading back to an in-person year. Legislators themselves are no longer required to wear masks, though a handful of them do, especially on the floor. Staff in both houses are encouraged to come back to the Capitol, though a lot of it's left up to their members and being told what to do. And while the new Capitol Annex is open, the memos that staff and members were sent that basically said because of less office space and because of COVID, we still encourage people to do meetings remotely. So we are definitely seeing a lot of that. And then, as you'll recall, last year, the Senate, especially on the floor, when a few members came down with COVID, were allowed to vote and participate remotely. They have been told they can no longer participate remotely as legislators themselves. So that's new. And yeah, as you know, our Capitol, the part that was built, not in the non-historic side, has been started to be torn down, and the new Capitol Annex was built 2 blocks away. So all the legislators in the governor's office are now housed in this new state-of-the-art building, and it's getting a lot of them and folks getting some used to it. Definitely not the space that we had before. So that will be interesting to toggle for the next 5 or 6 years while the old Capitol is being constructed. So this part I think is most interesting, and I know you talked before an agenda item before this about all the redistricting, but in addition to redistricting, we've had this great resignation of legislators, and this last week on March 11th was the deadline for filing for races for incumbents, and I'm on slide 4. Yeah, thank you. And next week on the 16th is the deadline filing for races with an incumbent filing. So at least now we have a better, clear picture of basically where things stand. But here are some numbers that I thought were interesting. 7 senators are termed out in 2022, so 7 of the 40. 3 senators have told us they're not running for re-election. 6 senators are running for re-election this November for their final 4-year term, and 10 senators will be termed out in 2024. That is a lot of change. And then on the assembly side, while there are no members who are termed out in 2022, we have 5 special elections to be held in 2022 to fill certain vacancies. One of those has already been filled for former Assemblymember Chow's seat. He was appointed a judicial appointment. So we have 4 vacancies still to be filled with special elections this year. 24 of the 80 assembly members are termed out in 2024, and only 9 members are running for re-election in 2022 for their final term. And then 13 assembly members are termed out in 2026. So that means, what does that mean? It means a lot of change, a lot of new relationships that have to be built for folks like yourselves, though thankfully a lot of people running in those seats are people you probably see at events or already know. And then it also means a lot of change in committee makeup. So already we have a new assembly, basically water committee chair that we're working to have a relationship with for the district. We have a new chair of appropriations committee, which is where all the bills that are fiscal go. And so that's a big change. And then we have a new chairwoman of revenue and tax committee, where the bill that was mentioned earlier about the income, for a turf replacement would go through. And that used to be chaired by our own Assembly member, Autumn Burke, and it's now being chaired by Jackie Irwin, who hasn't been a West Basin rep to date, but it looks like with one of the new lines built there, she'll be one of our representatives. So just something if I was interesting to point out for you all. Yep. So next slide. So I don't want to, talk about this too much, since I know you just had the presenter from Nielsen Merksmer speak on your behalf, but just wanted to point out how the new maps technically could change some of our representatives. And these obviously were done, new lines drawn for the 2022 election. And it looks like we picked up 1 assembly seat for our representation. So in Senate District 24, Senator Allen, who has, been a pleasure to work with, will run for this seat. In the new Senate District 28, Senator Keimliger has that, would have that seat. But as you all know, she announced her run for Congress, so that we'll see a new representative there for us. And the new Senate District 35, Senator Bradford is there, and he won't be turned out until 2024. In Assembly District 42, hopefully you can see on that map, because it covers part of Thousand Oaks, that's where we believe Assemblymember Jackie Irwin will then be seated. And then in Assembly District 51, that is Assemblymember Bloom's district. But as you know, he was going to run for supervisor, and then a few weeks ago announced that he was not going to run and he wasn't going to seek those, that final term. So that's an opening. Assembly District 55, Assemblymember Isaac Bryan, who was new to us last year or the year before, he will still be running for that seat. In Assembly District 66, we believe Assemblymember Al Martucci, we expect that he'll be running again. And then finally, we have the new Assembly District 61, and that was represented by Assemblymember Burke, who resigned. And there are 4 Democrats who have filed to run for that seat, and that will be filled with the special election on April 5th of this year. So coming up, so we'll at least know part of the story at that point. So our next slide, we wanted to delve a little bit into the budget. As you all know, in January, the governor came out with his draft budget with a $286 billion proposal. There's an anticipated almost $50 billion surplus. The budget proposal included $750 million for drought, basically for water, drought resilience and response package. Overall, it seemed like not a lot, especially compared to last year's budget, in which he allocated $5.2 billion. That being said, the $5.2 billion was to be allocated over the next 3 years. So in the green, while it looks like a bigger number than what was in the budget this year, there are still funds adopted last year that will be spent over the next 3 years. Including that budget will be $180 million for water conservation, $145 million for water supply shortages, several million for contingency funding and other drought related activities. And I'll talk a little more specifically about how we're getting involved for the district with those. We are also working closely within the budget framework with your associations, specifically Aqua and water reuse. We're following what Met's doing. Aqua submitted a letter with their priorities based on membership feedback. the greatest allotment they're seeking is 180 million for dam safety reservoir options. While I know that isn't in our backyard, you know, the implication of that is helpful for the whole state. Money for conveyance, recycling, etc. And then on water reuse, we signed on to a letter working with them and doing lobbying meetings with them, basically for an inclusion of 750 million in grant funds for recycled water to be a part of the package. So we're all working that through the budget process in hopes that when the governor comes out with his May revise, which is his updated budget from January, we'll see some, you know, maybe augmented numbers or more specific numbers to water recycling. So on the next slide, this is just a little expansion of what I was talking about as far as budget advocacy and what we're doing here. Approximately 882 million of the almost $4 billion budget last year has been allocated for water and drought. 350 million for groundwater cleanup and recycling, and this has not yet been divvied up. So what we are doing is working through the budget committees, that's the legislative process, on what their interests are for how that money will be divvied up. And we're working with legislators to lobby them that the majority of that total funding should be used for water recycling. And I believe in one of those pieces, Assemblymember Bloom, who we talked about earlier, you know, expressed his desire for that. And he is one of the budget subcommittee chairs that, you know, can help influence those decisions. As I mentioned, we're working with water reuse to lobby for a standalone increased budget for water recycling. And then also, you know, working, you know, in tandem and trying to coordinate, you know, where we can possibly with Metropolitan Water District. So next slide, water bond. This piece shouldn't take too long. You've heard us present on the water bonds, I would say, for the last several years, none of them necessarily coming to fruition. But Assemblymember Eddie Garcia, you know, had introduced his bill, AB 2387, which, if approved by voters after the legislature adopted it, would provide for $7.43 billion to finance several types of water projects: wildfire prevention, drinking water, flood protection, etc. If that were to move through the legislative process, it still needs a 2/3 vote. And given we were down so many legislators, that's not an easy thing to have happen. And this year's vehicle is basically a reintroduction of AB 1500, which, you know, you've heard from us in the past. But I would say, given the huge surplus, given the money that the legislature and the governor has allocated to water in the past, I don't think we all feel confident that a separate water bond through one of these vehicles would pass. But it definitely will serve as a conversation starting point on what the legislature wants, so that if there is a final budget allocation via the governor's budget, they'll have some direction on what to fund. So next slide here, priority legislation. As I mentioned earlier, we're tracking over 60 bills for the district. And so these are just a few of them. The last year, you recall, Assemblywoman Christina Garcia had her bill 1195. This was around conversations with Central Basin. While it could move at the end this year, our understanding is she's not going to work on the issue, or at least move her bill this year. Instead, you'll see on the right side, SB 1124 by Senator Archuleta. He has introduced a bill around Central Basin. And so we are watching that closely. They took a few amendments yesterday on how to further define what disadvantaged community means as far as, you know, getting water for things like water cleanup around PFAS. So working on that closely. I think the other one, I won't read through all these, but the other one to point out here is SB 1157 by Senator Hertzberg. You'll recall that Assemblymember Friedman did a bill that asked for DWR and the Water Resources Control Board to look at, you know, indoor water use restrictions. And that report came out, and now they're trying to figure out what to do and implement that. With that, a lot of the water districts weren't happy with what came out from that state report because they didn't feel like it took into consideration several things, including a lot of more people working from home, for example. So Senator Hertzberg has his bill that's been introduced. I heard he spoke at Aqua last week. He wants to have the conversations. Assemblymember Friedman, who has really carried a lot of these bills in the past, technically does not have a bill specifically introduced on water use reductions for indoor use. She may have a spot bill or two that turn into that. So we will keep a close eye on that and work with both offices, or at least Senator Hertzberg's office, to make sure that if they do a bill, that it's something that, we can live with and get behind. And then you already talked about 2142, the bill on the water rebates for turf replacement. And I won't go into the other one specifically just to save your all some time. So our next slide and final slide is just on drought actions. As you know, the governor had his executive order in July, basically calling for Californians to reduce water use. And I think a lot of us suspected he was calling for voluntary reductions in hopes that we would, see reductions and not be required for him to come out and ask for mandatory reductions. Unfortunately, while we had one good rain several months ago, we haven't seen much rain since. And therefore, the water board has banned wasteful water practices. The governor's extended his drought emergency statewide a bit further. He has announced additional spending to help respond to this immediate drought emergency. And then on March 1st, the state snowpack survey was done and showed levels were dropping sharply again, even after that one piece of storm, the good storm in December. So given the dire drought situation and conditions, and the response to the drought will continue to be an epic, a focus of the legislature and the administration this year. And we will continue to be a part of those conversations and report back to you as those conversations happen. So that's it on my end. I know I threw a lot at you. There's a lot going on, so we wanted to make sure you heard it all and here for any questions that you may have, or not even questions. If there's something you want us to watch more specifically going into this year, we will take note.
All right, thank
Emily.
you. Board members, any question? I'm
Yes,
still here, Don.
Madam Chair.
Director, what you?
Thank you. Thank you, Emily, for your report. Very good. I have a question. I don't know if I missed this or what, but it's concerning the 64th AD and the 65th AD. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there or what happened there?
64th AD.
That was the assembly member there was Gibson.
Oh my God. So I guess I don't know if Matt's on this call, and I am not, or the gentleman from Nielsen Merksmer, because I don't see him any longer on the maps that we were given. So is he maybe not representing our district anymore?
Well,
or
that would be a concern of mine, because he was representing 64th AD, and if he goes away, where did he go, or who do we get, or what happens there? Because that's part of 64th is part of the first division for West Basin, Division 1, which happens to be my division.
Right, and we know we've had a good working relationship, at least up here, when we brought your issues to the assembly member. So I don't know if these maps that we were provided are not up to date or what, but we will make sure to look into that unless someone else on the call knows better than I do. That's an expert in redistricting. Please chime in. But otherwise, Director Gibson, we will look into that and we'll shoot EJ and Matt a note today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Emily, I don't believe that there's been a change to the assembly member's district. I think he's still anticipated to represent Carson, but if I'm incorrect in that, Director Williams, I will let you know as soon as possible. We'll get the answer before the end of this meeting.
Thank you.
Madam Chair. Oh, go ahead, Director Houston.
Director Houston, if I can speak, I'm not sure if the chair is still on the call.
I'm sorry, I'm still here, please, Director
Oh,
Houston.
Hi, Emily. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And I don't think Gibson changed, but I'm not looking at that map at this moment, but I'm sure they'll get us that answer. Just a couple things really, really fast. And I'm glad you highlighted it, because that's my understanding, is that we're going to inherit another assembly member, Jackie Irwin. That's what I'm understanding and hearing. And so assuming that does hold true, I look forward to meeting her, since she'll be representing part of my area. but also the fact that she's going to be the chair of Revenue and Tax. So that's interesting and good to know, very timely. I also did want to point out that just maybe for your own knowledge, a lot of us know Mike Fong for many years down here. And so now that he's in the assembly, I think he will also still be a great contact for us at West Basin. So maybe make a note of that. You know, congratulations to him on winning that special election. But depending on what things he gets to champion, I think he could be a good advocate for us. Let's see, I think there were two things I noted in your discussion. Oh yeah, Governor Newsom, I know just the other day, or maybe it was over the weekend, he announced that, you know, he's going to put some money into outreach. Do you have any more clarification on what that exactly means?
Was it outreach around the drought funding or his most recent outreach around Ukraine, which I assume is not what you,
Oh.
yeah.
No, I think about the drought.
Yeah, I will, I think I saw his announcement. I couldn't tell if he was reiterating what he's already done in the past, Director Houston, but I will check into it and also report back before the end of your meeting today. Thanks for asking.
Good, because I know Metropolitan just put some money into outreach, I think this past week or two. And I know that in our area, or at least in my area, a number of constituents are kind of clamoring as to where is the governor on the drought. I guess there was that major press conference late last week, you know, Wade Crowfoot and some others, Joaquin was there, but people were like, well, where's the governor? Now, of course, he threw some money in, I think, over the weekend on outreach. So now this is getting real hot and heavy. So I think we're all really focused on how are we going to really push Californians to save more water and get very serious about the drought at this point. So I think it's all hands on deck right now. But if you could let us know where that funding is going to go and what it means to those of us in SoCal, because if Metropolitan's putting money out there, and then of course, you know, West Basin, we do our community outreach part, but there's a lot at stake, I think, at this point. But so some of that other funding on top of us really helps a lot because, you know, we don't have the funds to spend on the outreach in the same manner.
Absolutely. I think that's well noted. We'll look into that pot. And I think just to your general question of what is, you know, the state doing as far as not just outreach, but what are we doing to get ahead of this drought? And I think a lot of water districts generally are feeling frustrated and upset by this. And I think are talking about a lot of creative ways to make their voices heard in Sacramento. So we're also following that kind of effort or grassroots effort, and we'll keep you apprised as well.
No, perfect. And then I'm really interested, just if you guys will continue tracking it on Senator Hertzberg's bill. And I did see that he was on a panel at the Aqua Legislative Forum the other day, late last week, I think it was. But again, I'm really interested on how that moves and what folks are thinking about that bill. So, you know, as far as one of my priorities would be that one, if you guys continue tracking it.
Perfect.
SB 1157.
Yeah.
And last thing is, I said too, but I just remembered one more thing. So Aqua is going to be in person again up in Sacramento, I think early May. And I do plan to attend, but with the state of the Capitol and or people being around or not, do you know how they're going to work some of that where people are able to have any kind of meetings and or if maybe the legislators come over to the conference? I mean, do you know how some of that might work?
I haven't talked to coordinated with Aqua about it, but I know another, you know, municipal association today had a conference room reserved, and they had members come over to them that felt comfortable. We were with a legislator last night who said, I don't want to meet with anyone in my office because I don't want to put my staff at risk, but I'll meet you outside for coffee. So why doesn't our office work with EJ and Matthew to see who's coming up of, you know, I know you said you were for the Aqua conference and see if it makes sense and of the delegation we want to meet with, and if they would meet with us offline outside of the Aqua conference, we're happy to set those up.
Okay, no, that would be really great. I think that in any way, shape, or form, if we have a chance to meet with people, even if it's just, if it has to be outside at a coffee house or something, I mean, we need to be able to have some discussions. So if you could look at that, that would be fantastic. And otherwise, I know you guys have been tracking a lot of bills, and now, of course, we got redistricting, and then we're going to have, these big elections this fall. So it's just a crazy time, as we all know. But I just want to extend my thanks to you and your team, and for these wonderful updates, but also just keeping us posted on some of those key bills. So thank you very much, Emily.
Thank you, and we'll follow up with all, a few of your things. Thanks.
Sure, you got it.
Okay.
Is that Director Deere?
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
Had a computer problem.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Emily. Thank you for the presentation. Again, to members of the committee and board, next month we will have our representatives from Van Scoyoc and Associates for a federal affairs update. So we're excited about that. The last item that we have on our information calendar is item 6C, and that is our Metropolitan Water District Programs update. And for this presentation, we have Tammy Hurley-High, our Water Policy and Resources Analyst 2, for the presentation.
Thank you, EJ. Good afternoon, Chair Gray and Member Deere and board directors. So this report summarizes the recent activities at Metropolitan, and they include the proposed biannual budget, the capital investment plan, the general manager's proposed strategic priorities, the Delta Island adaptation, and then we'll conclude with an update on the water supply conditions. So yes, if this information starts on page 47 on your committee packet. So with regard to the proposed biannual budget and rates, last month, Metropolitan staff provided 2 presentations for their board for review and input. And Metropolitan staff has presented the proposed budget rates. They've identified this as a transitionary biannual budget. And the reasoning behind this is mainly due to 4 major planning documents that are currently underway. And these items of significance include the Integrated Resources Plan, the Rate Refinement Process, the Long-Term Financial Plan, and the Business Plan. So according to Metropolitan staff, the intent of the proposed budget is to strike a balance between the funding of several areas that include strategic priorities, addressing the drought conditions, maintaining financial robustness, and moderating rate impacts. So following on the next page of this memo, there is a table, excuse me, that shows the proposed rates and charges. And this table represents the unbundled rates and charges. Metropolitan current rate for the Tier 1 full service treated volumetric cost is shown here as $1,143 per acre foot. And excuse me, I'm sorry. Looking at the proposed rate for 2023, the Tier 1 full service treated volumetric cost increases to $1,252 per acre foot, and then up to $1,322 per acre foot in 2024. So this bottom line represents an overall increase of 8% for each year. And for more information on the unbundled rate categories and the services they provide, there is a brief description listed in the memo below the graphic. So moving ahead to the next page, Metropolitan staff has identified updates to the proposed budget that reflects 5 main areas of their business structure. And those 5 areas include department O&M cuts, bond financing the AVEC High Desert program, using the California Water Fix refund money for Delta planning cost, reducing PAYGO, and finally bond financing a portion of their conservation program. So Metropolitan's budget mainly revolves around the water transactions and the rate forecast. And Metropolitan is anticipating lower demand for the potable water supply in the next 2 years of about 1.6 million acre feet. Also, Metropolitan has observed that population is expected to increase over the next 10 years by over 1 million. However, even with the increase of the population, Metropolitan is expecting a continued decline on the water demand, particularly related to a decline in per capita water use and also several local projects that will be coming online and will further reduce the need for imported water sales. So instead of projecting for higher demand of imported water, Metropolitan's projection for water demands are flatlined for the next 2 years. So another graphic highlighted in this memo shows the historic rate increases and the percentages along with the projected increases for the next 2 years. So this is a snapshot of how the rates have increased over the past 10 years or so. So if we can move to the next page, please. Figure 3, this is a graphic that shows the projected rate increases in financial indicators of the 10-year forecast. And the last time the rates were approved for an increase of 3% in 2021 and 4% in 2022. So for the year 2025 through 2032, the rate increases are flatlined, as I mentioned earlier, at 5% for each biennium. And the next graphic under figure 4 shows the impact of the rate drivers. And the proposed 16% increase for the next 2 years is broken down into 4 main areas. And looking at these rate drivers individually, there's a 6% increase. It impacts the revenue requirement that makes a percentage of the rate increase, or 3% each year. A 4% increase results in the anticipation of lower water sales transactions by a reduction of 60,000 acre feet. A 5% increase is a result of revenue loss from the water stewardship rate revenues. And then finally, the 1% increase is due to the fact that the rate increases are on a calendar year basis and therefore are only in effect for half of the fiscal year. So a couple of other items to note here is that Metropolitan will be drawing $84 million from the Water Stewardship Fund and unrestricted reserve during the next 2 fiscal years. And Metropolitan will have a lower revenue bond coverage of 1.4 times instead of their target of 2 times. So Metropolitan will plan a 4th workshop to continue the discussion on Tuesday, March 22nd. They did not have that information at the time we wrote this memo, but that will be their next workshop. And for more detailed information on the report, a link has been provided in the memo for online access. So before I move on to the other areas of Metropolitan activities, I'll pause for a minute to see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, this is Director Houston. I have a couple questions. I guess if you go back a slide or two, Tammy, where that figure 1 chart is, and I want to just understand. There you go. Now, and maybe EJ knows as well, but what exactly, because there's a full service untreated, there's the full service treated, tier 1 and tier 2. What is it that West Basin normally is it that we buy? Can we just clarify that?
Correct. So usually it's a full service treated volumetric cost. So if you look up ahead, they start breaking off the supply rate, the access rate, the power rate, and then they get into the untreated volumetric cost. So that untreated is usually for groundwater replenishment sales. So you get into the full service treated, you add up those earlier line items, and then the tier 1 cost is, as I mentioned, is currently $1,143 per acre foot. Metropolitan typically does not go into the tier 2 cost, and I don't believe that West Basin has yet to get close to that either.
Okay. So we're normally the tier 1, right?
Correct.
Okay. So all I'm seeing is these are pretty significant increases over the next 2 years. So even on the tier 1, it's going to go up about 16% in 2 years. I mean, 16% in 2 years on the tier 1, but even just in general, this rate increase of 8% each year, 16% in 2 years. I just find that pretty hard to swallow at this moment. I do see in one of your later charts that then they say they're going to raise it 5% a year after that, you know, going into the future. But this is a real significant increase. And, you know, in our last Met Caucus meeting, you know, we got that presentation. That was a lot to digest at that moment. So I don't think anybody had time to look at that. But for what it's worth, I think that West Basin needs to really look at this. I mean, 16% in 2 years in the midst of everything else going on in this economy. And I understand that Metropolitan's got to deal with their costs, but it seems to me they probably could look at some lower increases this cycle. So that's just my opinion at the moment, but I find it really, really hard to have a 16% increase in 2 years just cramp the throat. So hopefully some folks will think that that's some conversation that they can have with Metropolitan regarding how the agencies feel about that a lot. So I understand the 5%, and maybe that's a better number. But for what it's worth, I'm just going to put that opinion in now, and hopefully people will continue to talk about it. This is not done yet, but all those costs get passed straight to us, and then we pass straight down to our retailers. And I know the general public really doesn't hear all this. They don't understand it at all. So that's its own. But for what it's worth, for those of us who are here elected to look at this and make opinions and take positions, I just don't think that 8% in 2 years time again best course. So, but thank you. You know, you got some good information right here on clarification. And so, by the way, will this be discussed at our next Met Caucus meeting some more? Is that going to be part of this?
Yeah, I was just going to thank you for the comments. I appreciate hearing them. And we can certainly invite the Metropolitan staff to come back again to provide a little bit more information and feedback from the conversations that they've recently had with their committee. So we can certainly do that. And then I can also share with you, there's a lot of similar feedback from what you have stated. A lot of agencies are feeling the same way. So
okay, that's good.
Yeah.
No, I'm really glad, because unfortunately what I find is I think a lot of it's like there's either silence or, you know, we don't really hear what everyone else is thinking, or they just don't opine. So I think it behooves us as the fourth largest member to be able to talk about it. When do they plan to finalize this at Metropolitan's board?
They are planning to do this in April.
April. You know what date approximately, or is it middle of the month? Or?
It would be the second week, so it's the second Tuesday in April, April 12th.
Well, okay, yeah. So it's basically a month from now. Not even a month from now. Actually, it's the 15th. So see, that's what's scary, is that within a month, this could very well be voted on and done. So we have not very much time for anybody to really rethink this. So for what it's worth, 16% in 2 years, I think, is really astronomically high. So, but thank you, Tammy. That's not, you're just delivering the news. Right?
No, I understand.
But as a board member, it's incumbent on me to also articulate what I think is a position that's valid. So anyways, but thank you for that.
Yeah. Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Williams.
Thank you. I would just like to comment and say that, you know, at our caucus meetings, and we've been having caucus meetings for forever. And when I was chair and I had the opportunity to lead those caucus meetings, we would ask for questions from members, and members had the same thoughts that Director Houston just indicated, but they say nothing at the caucus meetings. And the representative from Met, we would ask, well, questions, and we'd go stone silent. So what do they say? Silence is consent. So I would appreciate it if at our caucus meetings that we use them to hammer on Metropolitan to ask the hard questions. Don't let them off the hook. But we do this time and time again. We say nothing. And I think if you're really concerned about the cost of water, you need to bring it up. So please, I implore all of you to come to our caucus meetings and ask questions. We'll give you all the time you need to ask your question. So please, our next meeting is when? EJ?
April 6th will be the next MWD caucus meeting. And it's also important to note that this item will obviously, because it's the information item, will move forward. It'll be part of our full board agenda later this month. And if any director so chooses, they could pull the item for further discussion. It will be an agendized discussion item. So there would be another opportunity to discuss this if a board member chooses.
Thank you. Did you hear that, Director Houston?
Oh, yes, yes. Thank you, Director Williams. I did. And you know, well, I think two things. One is at the caucus meetings, yes, I know unfortunately there just hasn't been the same dialogue, myself included. We just, you know, it's so different when we're not in person. When we were in person, we had a lot more discussion amongst the folks who showed up. So I think that'll be even better when we get back to normal on that front. But for what it's worth, even this last one, you know, we got that presentation was so last minute, and then it was talked about, sure, but I mean, it was almost like, am I really seeing and believing what I'm seeing, that this was presented before us was 16% in that? And so there wasn't much time to digest, but obviously I've been watching this and I was looking at this, and I'm glad the numbers are right here in front of us, our faces. So I think this should be something, yes, that we might talk about at our board meeting, let alone the next caucus meeting. And so I do appreciate it, Director Williams. And I think that we have had a lack of the discussion the way it used to be. So down the road, I expect that that'll probably get more robust once again. But for now, you know, I'm engaged. We're engaged. So
all right, very good.
Let's keep it on it. There you go. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for those comments. I appreciate it. If we could advance to the next page, please. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the capital investment plan. So the board authorized amending their capital investment plan for the current fiscal year budget. And this now includes planning and implementation of infrastructure projects to improve the water supply reliability for their portions of their service area that are state water project, dependent on the state water project water. And as you're aware, DWR began water supply allocations of 0% at the beginning of this water year, and Metropolitan was able to receive just enough supply for the state water project for the health and safety needs. And this has had a significant impact on their current infrastructure to deliver water to certain portions of their service area on the eastern side and the western side. So this board action includes authorization of professional services not to exceed $300,000 to provide hydraulic modeling and technical support related to infrastructure improvement. And this action follows the board authorization last December and then also in February, amending the CIP program to include projects that can improve the water supply reliability and the flexibility. Now, moving forward, Metropolitan will provide a comprehensive assessment of advancing two projects identified as the Gregg Avenue and Sepulveda feeder pumping station facilities. So the next item pertains to the general manager's proposed strategic priorities. And Metropolitan General Manager was able to provide a brief overview during our recent caucus meeting earlier this month. And members of Metropolitan's Executive Committee received a presentation on the draft strategic priorities. And these priorities outline a strategic action for long-term goals that will shape the general manager's business plan. And there's 5 priorities that are identified, and each 5 of these contain 2 leading goals. There's a brief description listed in this board memo. And since we've kind of already received the presentation from him, I'll skip over that, but if you have any questions, let me know. And if we could move to the next page, please. Thank you. So regarding the Delta Island adaptations, there will be an online meeting scheduled for this afternoon at 4 o'clock. And a link is provided in the memo for folks who may be interested in attending. So Metropolitan owns 4 islands in the Delta, which provides an opportunity to conduct science and research that support water system reliability. And Metropolitan is embarking on the Delta Island Adaptation Planning Level Project, which is a collaborative planning process to improve the resilience and sustainability of the island. So next, regarding board actions, attached to the memo is a list of items that were approved in February, and also attached is a draft list for their items in March, and a copy of the board votes from last February. So lastly, for the water supply update, at the end of this report, it includes an attachment with the graphics for the current conditions. And the highlight of these charts indicates snowmelt has started in the Northern Sierra, and the month of February has been very dry in both the Sierra and the Upper Colorado River Basin. So for the State Water Project, the current allocation to the contracting agencies is 15%. And on March 1st, California Department of Water Resources conducted its 3rd snow survey of the season. And that survey recorded 35 inches of snow at Phillips Station, located in the Sierra Mountains below Lake Tahoe. And that's about 68% of average for this time of year. So both months of January and February have been recorded as the driest months in California's history, despite the large storms that came in December. And Lake Oroville is currently at 47% full. DWR is closely tracking the changing conditions. They're actively assessing whether they will take additional actions, which may lower the 15% allocation. So we'll stay tuned on that. And then on the right side of the page for the Colorado River Basin, this graph shows Lake Mead to be at 34% capacity and its elevation at 1,067 feet. So if we can move to the last page, on the second page, showing the storage reserve for the 2 watersheds. And a couple of areas to note for the State Water Project in the green shaded area, the Oroville Reservoir storage chart is showing 350,000 acre feet more than last year. For the Colorado River, the blue shaded area, Lake Power storage continues to show a decline in elevation. And there's a graphic for Lake Mead surplus shortage, which is towards the bottom. Metropolitan has added information pertaining to what their average drought contingency plan contribution would be. And this forecast includes the drought contingency plan contributions. It includes items implemented to date under the 500+ plans that they recently approved. And so with that, this concludes the report, and I would be happy to address any other questions that you may have.
Yeah, this is the Director Houston. Actually, I was sitting here thinking while you're finishing this out, kind of brainstorming, and staff, I'm going to ask you guys to help here, but I don't know how we, I mean, we post our agendas. I assume you have some sort of a outreach newsletter or blast list for, you know, for our retailers, of course, customer agencies, but then maybe you do also this for the city managers or council people in our area. I don't know, but how can we better let them know about how to participate, not just with West Basin, but with Metropolitan? Unless, you know, those of us who have time in the middle of the day to go to these meetings, we're the ones that are there. It's incumbent on us to show up and be the representative, if you will. But how do we let the other folks know, just so at least they're aware and or they could put it in their schedule to potentially attend? Like I know there's Met's doing workshops or budget workshops, et cetera, but how can we do something about that?
Director Houston, I think when it comes to our MWD caucus meeting, and of course the committee and board agendas. So, for instance, this meeting notice, we have a pretty robust distribution list as far as who gets those. On occasion, we do have some different members of city councils, and then of course the South Bay City's Council of Governments assists us as far as our outreach goes as well. So there's different opportunities depending on the engagement of each of our cities. We also have our kind of quarterly newsletter that goes out. But again, that goes out to the general public as well as our cities and customers as well. That's typically information related to conservation programs, drought updates, and stuff like that. It really is a newsletter that almost anybody could get great information from. But I'm happy to look at and see how we get the word out as far as MWD outreach goes, and see if we can stir up some additional engagement. It's also worth noting, and I know you're familiar with this effort, but Metropolitan Water District does have what I would call regional outreach experts. And in our area, we do have Mr. Charles Gale, who does an excellent job of coordinating with all of the chambers. He typically sits on several of the different governing boards of the South Bay City's Chambers of Commerce, but also the individual members, the chamber members. So they're always working to kind of build support for their efforts. So it's kind of a multi-pronged or multi-layered approach as far as getting additional interest and Metropolitan Water District activities. But again, staff is happy to kind of brainstorm and find some new opportunities to really engage our customers as well as our municipalities on issues related to Metropolitan Water District.
Okay. And I mean, I know Chuck Gale, and I know that he's a member of many of the chambers, especially in the South Bay. Now, of course, I haven't seen any chamber newsletters that include a link or a talk about, hey, there's going to be a hearing at Metropolitan about the water rates, so it's just, I've never seen that. So this goes back to the fact that it's really incumbent on the regional member agency, I suppose, sometimes to get the final word out. So I think this is something we need to really look at longer term to try and adjust this so that people understand decisions are being made on their behalf, whether they may or may not realize it. And that's why, again, it's so important. If it's a city council that appoints a Met member director, however, that gets parlayed to that local city. And we're at West Basin. And so regardless of who's directors down there, we are the ones that are responsible to our 17 cities and unincorporated folks. So I think we've got to figure out a better way to at least put it out there once in a while that there is this, these meetings are coming up. Here's how you could log in and participate, etc. So I'm not here to try and solve the problem today, but what I would ask staff, if you guys could just send at least me something, when's that upcoming meeting? What are the links? Because I would like to put that out into Division 4, so people are aware. I think that both residents and elected officials in this area, number one, this is probably not their biggest priority in life, but number two, they should be aware. And should they want to opine, they have an opportunity, because guess what they're going to say later? I didn't know it happened. How come this happened? And then they're going to come talk in the West Basin and say, how come you guys didn't let us know? So I'll take it upon myself to help inform Division 4, but what I'd like is if you guys, EJ, just send me the 411 and the links and whatever, and I'll help get it out there. But I think in the future, we really have to address this in a better way. That's my opinion. So anyway, thank you for that and for the reports.
And Director Houston, we will send you some additional information. There's one additional outreach opportunity that I failed to think of on the spot, but I did want to also point out that we regularly provide updates to the West Basin Water Association, which includes nearly all of our retail customers, to let them know where Metropolitan Water District is as far as this process goes, as well as our budgeting process. always encouraging participation. Again, it varies depending on the time of year and depending on the issue. But we're always looking for ways to kind of maximize the outreach efforts when it comes to this. So we'll continue to work on it, and we will get you that information on the April committee and board meetings. And Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If this concludes that item, I would like to go back. I wanted to answer Director Williams's question related to Assemblymember Gibson. I did want to note that depending on where he resides, it does look like the 69th Assembly District, which includes the portion of Long Beach, does circle up and includes the majority of the city of Carson. It doesn't include West Carson, and it does not include the northern portions as you start to leave Carson. But I did want to note that he, depending on where he resides, he could possibly be in the 69th Assembly District. And then last but not least, Chairman Deere, as I was researching that and working with staff to get the answer to that, I accidentally moved on to 6C prior to the Federal Affairs update. And the Federal Affairs update does begin on packet page 43. And the reason I'd like to jump back to this is because we have some very good news to report today. And so for the Federal Affairs update, again, begin on packet page 43. Sorry to have to jump back up there. We do have Matthew Bay for this presentation to walk you through our Federal Affairs update. Matt?
Great. Thank you, EJ. And members of the committee and board, as EJ said, we do have some great news to share with you on the federal affairs side of things. So I'm excited to share that with you today here. This relates to West Basin and our Harbor South Bay recycled water projects. It's something that we've reported to you on a monthly basis for the last close to a year now. But over the weekend, President Biden signed the $1.5 trillion fiscal year 22 omnibus spending package that was passed by both the House and the Senate last week. And the passage of the omnibus bill will fund the federal government through the remainder of this fiscal year, which means through the end of September of 2022. So that'll help us avoid a potential government shutdown. It'll eliminate the need for any further short-term, temporary, continuing resolutions that we've kind of been using to fund the government for the last several months. And I know we've reported on this issue at each and every committee meeting for, like I said, for nearly a year now. But there was a total of $3.8 million in congressionally directed funds for two of West Basin's Title 22 recycled water projects in the appropriations bill. Those remained in there. And so that's kind of the good news, is that we're going to receive nearly $4 million for two recycled water projects for the areas of North Gardena, recycled water lateral there, as well as Mills Park in Carson. We're going to receive funding for that as well. And of course, this fund. Yes?
I said that is good news.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And so the funding support, in addition to, last year, President Williams sent letters of support to our delegation. So that was critical in this, but ultimately Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and then Senators Feinstein and Padilla, they really were our advocates in Washington, D.C. to make that funding possible. And so as stated in the monthly federal affairs update that was provided by our lobbyist, the Harbor South Bay project funding that we received was actually the highest amount of the 8 California-based Army Corps construction projects of its type to be included in the measure this year. And so again, we're just really happy that it all came to fruition, and that we can start moving forward with those projects next year. So what we're going to do now is to draft some thank you letters, which our lobbyist is already working on, to our federal delegation. That's being developed. That will come from President Deere, and then we will also continue to follow up with them and with the U.S. Army Corps as we kind of move forward into the next phases of these projects. And so we wanted to share the news with you here first today, but we're also working with the Public Information Department to develop a press release that will go out hopefully later this week to share the good news. In addition to that, Senator Feinstein is expected to introduce new legislation later this month called the STREAM Act. This legislation would seek to authorize or reauthorize some of the Western Water Program authorizations, funding authorizations that expired in December of last year, which would otherwise jeopardize the inclusion of some of the new projects which can get funding through the annual appropriations process. Some of the more significant reauthorizations that would be contained in this new act would be for Title 16, recycled water, desalination, and then some water storage project programs. Some of the funding highlights for the legislation include $750 million for groundwater and surface storage projects and conveyance, $300 million for water recycling projects under Title 16, $250 million in environmental funding, $150 million in desalination funding, $100 million for drinking water assistance to disadvantaged communities, $50 million for natural water retention and release projects, and then $150 million for other loan programs. Another big thing that this legislation would do would be to raise the per project funding cap up to $50 million. Right now it's at 20, I believe 20 or $30 million. So it would basically double that amount, which would get more funding to these types of projects. And so staff will consider asking the board to take a support position on this bill at next month's Water Policy Legislation Committee meeting. And then the final thing on my update is last month, the White House unveiled a new tool to help identify the communities that qualify as disadvantaged under the Biden administration's environmental justice initiative. And staff has taken that new data and we've already incorporated it into our GIS system, into new maps that will allow us to provide additional support for future programs that serve some of these priority communities in our service area. The updated maps will support and expand upon the existing Cal EPA EnviroScreen mapping software that we use for some of our other programs to identify communities that are subject to specific pollution and other socioeconomic factors. And then based on the added data and map layers, we're hoping that this may allow us to qualify for additional grant funding to continue offering new programs in these areas, such as the Grass Replacement Plus program that we currently offer to residents in some of those areas. And with that, that completes my federal affairs update. Please let me know if you have any other questions. Thank you.
Very good, Matthew. Thank you.
This is Board Member Houston.
Go ahead, Scott.
Let's see. Thank you for the updates, and thank you, EJ, for circling back, because I was going to ask about the federal report. Let's see. Okay. So I believe next month we're going to have Von Skoyak here, right? Somebody, Peter or somebody, right? So the STREAM Act, by that point, should have been introduced, and that's when we'll probably have a letter before us. But can you definitely talk to them to make sure we can get a little in the weeds of that and what it does mean for us, and or how heavy a lift that's going to be in the Congress? I don't know how bipartisan that is or not, but it looks like it's very important for us. So can you just make sure that they really are ready to talk about that for us and give us the whole 411? And how we can be supportive, of course, on that. And then the other thing I noticed in here at the very back end was something about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Water recycling is key to defense and local climate response. And so this letter here from Von Skoyak, so I'm going to read that more thoroughly in a bit. But did anybody from our staff get to go to water reuse conference in San Antonio? I was going to go, but I had to cancel. Did anybody get to go?
Director Houston, we did have our executive manager of engineering operations, Barka Masurlian, who was able to attend. I was also registered, but unfortunately I had to cancel to stay back here for committee and board meetings.
Okay. Okay, good. At least somebody was there. Maybe that's something, you know, I don't know, EJ, might work as in your general manager report or something. Maybe we can get just a quick highlight of how that went. But it's interesting here in the this report about the Army Corps of Engineers. Apparently, this was talked about in San Antonio. So I might be interested in what that was, a little bit of detail if anybody has better information.
Will do.
Because we obviously know that recycled water, that's extremely important, and that, you know, not just for us, but for many jurisdictions now. And I'm glad to see the federal government's paying so much attention. So I'd love to hear that. I think that's all, Matt, but I just wanted to make sure I covered everything, and you know, looking forward to seeing if it's Pete and Jeff, whoever's going to be here next month, with some good updates from DC. So thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, that concludes our information calendar.
Thank you. Thank you again, Matthew. There's no closed session. Director's comments. I want to start off by saying I think we need to take stands on some of the issues that were brought up earlier by outside folks. Have we not, has staff looked at us supporting AB, was it 953 and 2638 that Craig Cadwalder had brought up to us? I think we should look into that, supporting that, and also supporting the issue that issues brought up by the ladies who spoke before that. We need to take stands on those issues. Can we put that on an agenda somewhere, Mr. Manager?
President Deere, it's really important to note that the West Basin Municipal Water District has a support position on the EIR in terms of that project. The item is not agendized here today, so I don't want to go into too much detail and speak on something that's not agendized, but I will reach out to you. The letter that was mentioned has been forwarded to the board, but I'll reach out to you to discuss that specifically.
Okay. Other comments from directors?
Sure. Okay,
Scott?
real quick. I echo what the Chair Deere mentioned. I was actually going to say that too. I think that we should look at the two bills that Craig brought to our attention, EJ. So if you could bring that back to us, those sounded very interesting. So that's that. Also, I got an email earlier today from the Special Districts, California Special Districts Association, and they were talking about special districts opposing some sort of an initiative that supposedly would limit the ability of state and local governments to raise revenue for government services. I don't know exactly what all this means, but they're asking us to look at supporting, not really supporting it, but going against it. It's called initiative number 21-0042A1. And it was in their email blast letter that came out earlier today, EJ. So you might have a copy of it. But I think that would be good if you could let us know what that's about and if that might be something that we would participate in joining that coalition or not. So again, hot off the presses, I haven't heard of this thing. An initiative obviously is different than other things. So I'm not sure if it's going to the legislature or someone decided to pull some papers. I just don't know. So I think that's really important for us to know about. And then last but not least, I really just wanted to put out a reminder that the South Bay Cities Councils of Government Summit is next week. It's on Thursday, March 24th in the city of Carson, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. I think it's the first time they've done the in-person event in 2 years. I believe we are a sponsor as well, but I just put a reminder out to my colleagues. Hopefully you all can make it, and I'm assuming our staff will be there and probably have a table, but for what it's worth, the summit is next Thursday, the 24th. Isn't that right, EJ?
I believe so.
Okay. So anyway, I'm just putting a reminder to my board colleagues that it's happening, and I'll try and go for a couple hours myself, but put on your calendars. So anyways, and with that, I want to say thank you, staff, for a very good meeting. Thank you.
Is there any other business to come before the committee? Apparently not. So if there are no objections, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Chairman Deere, members of the committee and board, and thank you to staff.